Stop messing around, stop fooling around, stop delaying, stop procrastinating. Get up, get out, get it done. Everything is possible, nothing is a problem, and anything can be overcome. I just get my ass up out of bed, I get my shit together, and I get out and I start the fight. And that will transform you from a mere mortal into a superhuman being. I've never, ever, ever met anybody who told me that they got rich watching their IRA or their 401k.
All right, welcome back to the Daily Cash Flow. Welcome back, Peter. How you doing? I haven't seen you.
I have not seen you, George. Nice to see you. Nice to be back. All sorts of new things to talk about because the amount of time that's gone by since we've been here together has been so great that I don't even know where to get started. But
yeah, I mean, just to start simply, like what have you been up to over the last few months? Like looking, I guess one of the questions that I always like to ask when I haven't seen somebody is like looking back on the last season. Are there any themes or patterns that you've seen emerging, maybe in your own life or things you've consumed or watched?
Themes or patterns? First thing that comes to my mind, there's still a disconnect. A disconnect in the markets between buyers and sellers of assets, mostly real estate, because that's my primary concern, but there is a disconnect. Sellers think that their asset is the most expensive, incredible, awesome, irreplaceable thing in the world, and anybody who wants to buy it is going to have to pay a price which is a peak price that what we saw in 2021, for example. And buyers are saying, look, have you seen there's a global real estate crisis happening? Interest rates are through the roof. Your building that throws off whatever it throws off is now worth less because my financing prohibits my aggressive ability to bid for it. Transaction volume is down 50, 80, 90%, depending on where you look. Commercial property, nothing transacting. You know, the offices that we read about every day and the defaults and the bank foreclosures and all of the calamity with these big private equity firms that bought huge amounts of center MSA office properties. That is the thing that we hear about every day and we see about it every day. That's the face of the real estate crisis. But the story hasn't trickled down the media to these other asset classes yet. So no, we don't have a housing crisis because there's a disconnect. We don't have a multifamily crisis yet because there's a disconnect. If you want to buy multifamily property today, you're paying a 5 cap, or if it's a Class A building in a great market, you're paying a 4 and change cap, even though mortgage rates are mid-6s, approaching 7% for this stuff.
What would have to happen to remedy that disconnect? And is that even something that's desirable
capitulation
for everyone involved?
When sellers can capitulate, then the markets will be lubricated and there'll be transaction volume. But without capitulation, nothing happens. So capitulation is when the seller says, man, I can't wait anymore. I have no other options. I can't refinance out because interest rates are through the roof. I can't just set a high price because my property's sitting here. I have to pay mortgage, taxes, insurance. I've stopped paying my mortgage. Tax, I mean, who knows what I paid or what's still owed, but nothing's happening, so I have to drop the price. And once the price drops start to happen in meaningful ways, I'm not talking about a 1% price drop. I'm talking about a 30, 40, 50% price drop in most cases. And until you get that, markets are going to be locked up. So you need capitulation. You need the sellers to get a kick in the ass. They need to capitulate. The buyers are there, but they're not going to buy. Ultimately, the buyers set the price, right? Well, if the sellers set a high asking price and the buyers have a lower purchase price that meets their criteria, nothing's going to happen. The sellers have to come down or the buyers have to come up. Let me tell you, the buyers aren't coming up. It's tough out there. As a buyer, I'm just not finding a whole lot because of the disconnect. As a buyer and an investor, I'm just not seeing a whole lot of deal flow. I mean, I get all the usual emails and calls from the broker community. Hey, Peter, just checking in to see how you are, what you're working on, if I can add any value, what are you looking at? I mean, these brokers have nothing to do. There's no transaction volume, and they're not calling me with a deal to look at like they used to every other minute of every day. Now they're calling me because they got nothing but time on their hands because there's no transaction volume. And they want to know if I want to sell anything so they can pick up a listing. I mean, give me a break. No point of difference for all you brokers out there. Have a point of difference. Don't just make calls and be like, hey, checking in to see what I can do for you if you need anything. No, I don't need anything. I need capitulation. My sellers need to realize that it's not 2021 or the first quarter or two of 2022 where interest rates were so low that people were bidding up asset prices. Now you got to get real, guys. There's nothing out there happening, and the reason is the sellers still think that their piece of shit is the most valuable, desirable piece of shit that there ever was in the history of the planet. It's just not the case. I can buy some decent corporate debt, some A-rated corporate debt that pays in the mid-teens. That's a pretty good roll of the dice. Why do I need to put my equity to work in some building where I have to overpay to get the real estate and close on it? Borrow at a much higher rate than I'm ever used to borrowing. It's going to cash constrain the cash flow, this thing, whatever the cash flow may be. And then, like, I have to work, all for what? Like, I have to buy it at a 5 cap and hope I can get it to a 7 cap once I add the value. I can have my money sit in corporate debt for low to mid-teens.
Is that something you're employing as a strategy right now?
Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, investment alternative, George. You've heard me talk about investment alternative. My investment alternatives are I can just plunk money down in corporate debt or any other type of instrument which is out there, and there's several, and get a nice rate of return for a calculable and digestible amount of risk. I don't need to bang my head against a wall, buy real estate of any type, and wonder if I'm going to get a mortgage, if the bank can finance me. Lower LTVs right now. I can't get 70 or 75 LTV. I can get 55, but I can't get 70 or 75.
Yeah, this is a really important topic that I feel like we've touched on, throughout our conversations here, but it's that you run your numbers, that no asset is just, safe because it's what it is intrinsically. It's that there are trends that you need to pay attention to and run your numbers. And that's the only way you'll know if an investment is worth it.
I can be in a few different places in the capital stack that's better than being the equity in a market rate building. When I say market rate, I mean like a 5 cap apartment building, like yawn. Yeah. What do I need a 5 cap apartment building for? It's like the worst decision to make. So we need the sellers to capitulate. I can be in the mezzanine. I can have a mezz position. I can have some security. I can have an high interest rate. I can have collateral. And I can sit behind the first and I can wait that out and make my points in, points out, and then a nice coupon along the way. If I have to foreclose out, there's still some value to protect me. I mean, there's preferred stocks out there that are, some of them are paying 7-8%. I'm not a stock guy, but because the price is so low, cyclically, it's in a point in its cycle where the price is yielding 7 or 8% return on preferred stocks. So, and I have liquidity with that. So it's 7 or 8%, and I'm subject to market fluctuations, but I have liquidity. I can get in, I can get out, I can do whatever I want. With real estate, you can't. So there should be a premium paid to the equity for purchasing real estate right now. There's not. And unless you've got one of these situations like we read about every day where you're in San Francisco or New York or Los Angeles or one of these other cities and there's offices that are just sitting vacant and they're doing workouts and they're handing back keys. They just handed back the keys to the Sheraton Hotel in Atlanta, Georgia. There's some hotels that haven't recovered from post-pandemic operations yet. So unless you're one of those big categories, right? Big in terms of size of the asset and monetary size of the potential value. You're just not seeing anything. Look, if you want to throw together a few $100 million and go buy some foreclosed office building in San Francisco, there's plenty to choose from. I mean, you'll be busy. You'll have transaction volume all for the rest of the year and in the next year. But if you want multifamily, no capitulation, disconnect right now.
For you personally, do you have any goals, business-wise, personal-wise, relational-wise, that you are really looking forward to attacking as this September?
My goal right now, look, we're in a completely different world than when we were in a year ago. I want to stay alive, right? I'm not in Wild West gunslinger mode. I'm not in big acquisitions mode. I mean, that ship has sailed. If we're being honest out there, and our viewers and my entrepreneur and business owner friends, if we're being honest with each other, there's nothing happening out there. It's tough. There's no new business happening. So you have to stand on your existing business. We buckle down and manage the existing business best as we can in this environment because there's no new business to grow us for the moment. It's coming, but it's not here yet. Maybe the end of this year, maybe into the beginning of next year in 2024 and further out, we'll start to see more of the capitulation that I'm talking about, more of the connection versus the disconnect that I'm referring to in the markets. But it's tough out there. If you want to grow and if you need new business to stay alive, there's not a whole lot of new business.
So what steps are you taking to kind of double down on your own business and kind of improve and secure and make sure those things are going to survive?
No new steps. I'm always reviewing and implementing new things, and my existing business is really, really firm and tight. But the truth is that in my pie chart of my time and how I allocate my time, whatever portion of that pie chart was dedicated to new business before, it's not there. It's now just I refocus the new business time to existing business management. All right, we good? We good? I have reports. We get team meetings. We go budget meetings, and make sure everything's good. Stay alive till 25. Maybe some of you have heard that out there. There's a lot of people throwing that phrase around. I can't agree more. Stay alive this year, stay alive next year in 2025. Maybe the interest rates will start to cool off. Maybe markets will open up. Maybe the capitulation will occur and the disconnect will go away. Maybe.
Your strategy right now of staying alive, I feel like it's testament to your determination to focus on the fundamentals and build a business that is sustainable and efficient and effective. Because the thing is, you have a lot when times are good and everyone's getting the gold rush, you think like, oh, I can just be freewheeling with this business model. And then when times like this happen, you're like, oh, I guess I didn't actually have any sustainable business model.
George, well said. Right now and for the next couple of years, it's going to tell us who's who. It's going to separate the mice from the lions, and we're going to see who's who. I mean, it was very easy over the past 10 years to be a social media influencer and raise money in a Regulation A fund from the public for a minimum of $1,000 and offer participation in real estate that paid 5%. Like that was very easy. And everyone was doing it. Everyone was doing it. Some of the names some of the names we don't know, but there's a lot of people out there that just decided, hey, I'm going to be a syndicator. I'm in the construction business. I'm a contractor. I know real estate. I'm going to raise money from people and be a syndicator. And we're going to go buy stuff. I think that's going to be a problem. Those people are going to have a reckoning. And when they have that reckoning, it's our job to know about it and be there. Look, you could have failed upwards over the past 10 years. Now it's about basic fundamentals, acumen, investing principles, business foundational concepts. That's what it's about now. Now's the time. Do you know those? Do you practice those? Because if you don't, you're going to get smothered.
What is that phrase? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast?
We've all seen a lot of bullshit over the past 10 years and definitely over the past 3 or 4 years. I go onto social media and I see these young kids dressed flashy, almost screaming into the mic, about all this great success that they've had and how to get rich. If you can't tell the difference between someone who's a newbie who hasn't done shit and hasn't achieved anything versus someone who's seasoned and experienced and who's been around, who's got a track record, who's been through cycles, right? Business cycles. We're in one now. You got to be able to tell the difference. I mean, when you go to a bar to try and hook up with someone, like innately, you know the difference between someone who you're attracted to and who you're not attracted to because they've got certain features, right? I mean, I hate to break it down like that, but it's the same. Like when you watch the media or social media or when you're out there and you see these people that are, touting riches and how to become a millionaire and your first deal, make $1 million. I'll show you how. Come on.
What's the difference between being rich and being wealthy? That some of these people might actually have a lot of money on hand, but doesn't mean they've...
I think most of them don't have any money.
No, I think you're right about that. But even in the case of maybe they've made, a quick... million here or there, but like it's not a sustainable model that's going to create a business that you can replicate that is going to provide for your family in the future. That's kind of that kind of thing is a lot more rare and more difficult to produce. So it's back to school, September, and you heard about this sorority consultant that I think the Wall Street Journal did a post about her about she's consulting for like $4,000 to help people get into sororities.
It sounds to me like the college admissions scandal where people paid money to like a soccer coach or whoever to sort of get the kid in through a back door or get preferential treatment for an application. So they're paying $4,000 to get the daughter into a sorority?
Yeah, so it's like a consultant that kind of trains you and walks you through the steps of how to act and what to say and what to do with your social media and all these things.
So my reaction to this is I recognize that in life, in certain situations, having access to something unique can further you. Having access to be able to get in to a place, a group, a club, an institution, whatever it may be, might be an appropriate and relevant thing. This sorority example, young people have to get their heads screwed on straight. I don't know what the school is or what the sorority is that's part of this $4,000 consultant trying to get your daughter into a sorority. Man, it just doesn't resonate with me. Like find a group of people who love you for who you are, who want to take the time to get to know you and what you can bring to the table and connect with them. You know, I look at some of these sororities and I look at some of these situations in college campuses that I visit all the time, and it appears so homogenous. Like everybody is one type. They all look the same. George, this summer we went around and looked at different summer camps for our kid. In doing so, we found many, many summer camps that were right up the middle, homogenous. Every kid looked the same. They had the same hairstyle. They had the same pose in the picture. They wore the same clothes, the same performative smile for the photograph. And it was like, you know, you just get lost in the crowd. And I feel like the pressure to look like them and act like them and be accepted by them. I mean, who needs it? And look, I'm an older guy, so I've been around, so I know that I don't need it, you know, but I think when you're young, you don't know those things yet. So it's, you're more susceptible to wanting to pay a consultant $4,000 to be accepted into a sorority. And we instead preferred the summer camp where the photographs had a bunch of different looking kids, short, tall, fat, skinny, whatever, hair, like, you know, like it just seemed normal to me. Whereas the other ones that we saw where everyone looked like a carbon copy of everyone else, looked too cliquey, didn't resonate with me at all. And I think the same thing about this story with sororities. I think it's a shame that young people are feeling so hungry to be accepted that they ask mom and dad to fund $4,000. Well, what if you can't afford the $4,000? Do you then not get accepted? Do you then not have what it takes? It's like, what are we teaching people?
I think that's what came to mind when I saw this article, is that I think college, it reminds me of college just period. It reminds me of the whole university acceptance process. And I think universities would like you to believe that it's a much more difficult process and more rigorous and about something else other than networking. But I think for the most part, unless you're going into a specialty like medicine or law or something along those lines, coding or something, I think the college admissions process is probably a lot more like this than not. And I have the same question that you just proposed, which is, if you don't have the money to prepare yourself and to present yourself in a particular way to a college that's acceptable, does that mean you can't now go to that college because you weren't able to afford a consultancy fee? You know, that's problematic.
Here's what I've learned in my 55 years. If you're going to judge me based on money, it's not such an exclusive trait. What makes me desirable to you if you're looking at the size of my wallet? Because there's people to my left and right that have way fatter wallets. George, you can't judge a person based on the size of their wallet. We learned that a long, long time ago. Young people, I hope and pray that you guys can comprehend this. Anybody that's going to accept me because I can afford their acceptance, I don't know that I want to be connected with them. You know, my values are, how do you treat others? How do you treat me? Are you kind? Are you warm? Do you make me feel good when I'm around you? Like, that's what I'm looking for in others. You know, socially, we're talking about a sorority. So socially, that's what I'm looking for in others. And that's what I want someone to look for in me. Not if I can keep up financially with some random set of criteria that the den mom set. It's all screwed up and ass backwards to me.
Yeah, on the other hand, the idea for a business, it's a pretty great one. If people are willing to, if the market can bear $4,000, and that's something that you can make a business out of.
I'll cut you off there and say I don't support anyone getting into the business of charging $4,000 to get someone into a sorority.
I appreciate that take.
But I'll tell you what, everybody and everything is a consultant opportunity these days. I'll give you an example. So my nephew just had a brand new baby. Doesn't go anywhere. They barely leave the house. Can't come out and meet the family for dinner just locally nearby. Why? Because the sleep consultant says you can't. So they pay someone probably that much money and more that we were just talking about to tell them when to put the baby to sleep and when to do all these things with the baby. And everyone's doing it. I'm out of the loop, right? I'm 9 years out of the loop. I haven't experienced a baby in 9 years. We didn't have sleep consultants 9 years ago. Now there's sleep consultants. But I'll never forget this, what my mom told me. When I said to my mom, what do I do? We've got this baby. Like, I don't know what to do. I'm a new parent. Like, what's the blueprint? She said, look, just love it. Just love it and care for it. When it's crying, there's one of three issues. It needs food, it needs sleep, or it needs a diaper change. That's it. Those are your three choices. You don't need a consultant to tell you that. My mom, who had 4 kids, told me that. She knew from just nature, from biological, natural experience, being a mom. I mean, to me, that was the greatest advice I ever got. You can't screw it up. Just love it. Yeah. Just make sure you don't hurt the baby.
I have to admit, I didn't know that today when we started this podcast, we were going to get deep into the weeds of how to love humans and create them.
Well,
that's great.
No, I didn't know. I didn't know either. But we're talking about sorority admissions consultants, and I'm just like, what? And then the last time I remember feeling that way was when I was told that there are sleep consultants for newborns.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a good point in that we are slowly transitioning, or maybe quickly transitioning, into culture where we're outsourcing almost all
everything
of our decision making to a private specialist. And sometimes that's okay, but it does, I think, smell a bit like just commercialism and devoid of any kind of communal reality. And so, you got to be careful about that.
Yeah, I felt the sleep consultant for newborn babies was weird. But maybe I'm just out of touch. Tell me out there, do you guys have sleep consultants that you pay to tell you what to do with your baby and when each and every day? Because, I never did. And the older generations obviously never did. But maybe that's a thing now. Maybe it's a need in the market where these consultants are supplying that need. I don't know.
No,
it strikes me, without knowing, I admit I don't really know, but it strikes me, it feels the same to me as just the watering down and the dilution of so many things in our society right now. Now we're taking the parents' ultimate responsibility and what should be an innate skill, like caring for your baby, and we're sourcing that out to a third-party consultant who's now telling us when to put the baby to sleep, when to wake it up, when to feed it. We know that without the consultant. So I don't know. It seems, it feels like that to me.
Yeah. Seth Godin has a quote: "Market tells you that you don't have enough. Community tells you that you do." And it reminds me a little bit of that. Yeah. Is rent control constitutional? That's the question. Yeah.
I think it's not. I'm in the camp that says that rent control is a taking of property. Now, I'm a multifamily property owner, so you can make that very obvious and logical connection and be like, of course he feels that way. It's good for him. In the absence of me owning multifamily property, I feel that any government regulations that impair the owner's ability of whatever asset it may be to participate in a free market situation, I think is bad. I'm a free market advocate. Rent control is anti-free market. It's market controls, price controls. It's not good for the consumer. You want to know why we don't have enough housing supply in these expensive cities and everywhere else in our country? Housing policy, rent controls, rent policies. George, everything is supply and demand. New York City is limiting the supply. Whenever you do anything that limits supply and demand stays flat or increases, you have a negative impact to the consumer and to the economy. That's what rent controls do. Now, my adversaries will say, oh, well, housing's gotten so expensive and people really need assistance. I don't discount that. But one of the many failures of rent control is that it fails to differentiate between those participants in the market that need the assistance and those that don't. So, George, you could go to New York City right now, receive rent controls, depending on the apartment that you choose, and protections, and you might make a high income and you're still going to get these controls and protections. And it's going to cause you to live in this apartment, not move on with your life, and it's going to cause that apartment to stay out of circulation, out of commerce, and it would otherwise be one unit of supply that could be consumed by someone else that actually needs the protections and needs the controls. That's one of the first failures of rent control. No, I am not a believer that rent control, since you specifically asked about rent control, is constitutional. I think it's a taking of property, and I use that phrase, taking of property, because it's a legal standard. What I find interesting is that potentially there's a case in New York. It may escalate to the Supreme Court. They're hoping that it does.
I think there was an op-ed by Alexander Tellel, I think, in the New York Times or something along those lines, that he mentioned that was coming and that was a possibility.
Well, if it goes to the Supreme Court, look, it hasn't been to the Supreme Court in decades and decades and decades. So modern issue, housing and affordability, housing supply, modern issue of the day. Bring it to today's court. Bring it to today's Supreme Court. All we have is the decisions from like the 1970s and it's a new world. Let's give it a listen. Let's discuss it. But I don't think it's constitutional. I think it's a taking of property. I think you're taking a private property owner's property when you put in rent controls. Yeah, we need to do things that make it more affordable for people to live and to pay rent and to own homes or whatever the situation is. We need to do things. Rent controls don't do it. Rent controls just embolden and enact a certain voter base that are like, yeah, I'm a renter. I'll vote for this guy. They want rent controls. That's all it does, because it certainly doesn't make housing more affordable. Rent control doesn't create one unit of affordable housing.
Yeah, it also seems that since the enactment of, I think the original New York rent control was 1969, that I think it was like 73, there was another law that was passed that allowed for kind of emergency qualifications for tenants to announce that, okay, now this is going to be rent controlled. And then in 2019, I think any kind of expiration of those laws or those conditions went away. And so it's made it much more difficult even than the original intent.
I'll elaborate. Rent control in New York City is a product of a post-war condition where soldiers were coming home and they needed affordable places to live. That's who it was originally geared towards. And then fast forward decades and decades, I mean, that's not really the condition, although our veterans need affordable housing as well, God only knows. That's not what I'm saying. Fast forward to today, to 2023, where it's sort of everybody needs affordable housing and the markets are completely different and the cities are completely different and the housing supply and all of that is completely different. It has to get retested today. You know, we have to be able to have a discussion and say, hey, is rent control really a taking of property? I mean, why? Look, in New York City, if I'm a developer in New York City and I get permits to build a new apartment building, typically I have to set aside maybe 20% of my units as affordable units. And if I do that, the city gives me all sorts of tax breaks. They subsidize my ability to be able to create this product because the city wants the affordable units, so they subsidize me. If I am the owner of vintage, rent-stabilized or rent-controlled housing in New York City, these old apartment buildings, these old walk-up apartment buildings that you see in every block in every neighborhood, George, if I own one of those, with the way the rent control law works in New York City, I'm compelled to offer below-market rents to people, whereas the city wants to incentivize me to build a new building and subsidize me to build a new building. But if I own existing housing product, I'm compelled without subsidy to offer below market rent, without subsidy. That is the fracture and that is the failure in New York City's case of the housing market in New York City and rent control in New York City. It is an absolute failure. Policy has created the housing problem in New York, not a lack of supply. If they could get the policy right, the supply would self-correct. They have to get the policy right. They have to relook at zoning. They have to relook at rent controls and housing policies, these restrictive policies that prevent people from renovating apartments and bringing them into the marketplace and into commerce. I mean, if you own one of these old walk-up buildings with 20 or 100 or 80 units, whatever it is in New York City, you're probably sitting on 5 or 10 or 15 vacant apartments per building. Why? Because it does not pay to renovate the apartment and then put it back into commerce, because the new rent that you get to charge once you spend $150,000 or $300,000 or whatever it is to renovate and remove the lead paint and make it up to code. I mean, it's expensive. Once you spend that, you can't then go from the old rent of $900 to a new rent of $2,500 or whatever. You can't. It's going to stay right around $900. So what happens? No one renovates. All those apartments sit collecting dust. I mean, it's horrible. It's a complete failure. And if they would just change the policy and allow a rent reset upon the renovation of these units, I mean, there would be so much inventory, rent pressure would come down, so much more supply into the marketplace. George, in New York City, demand for housing is always high. It's going to stay the same. It's always going to be high. But if you introduce all sorts of new supply while demand remains the same, it's going to relieve pressure. And rents are going to go down. And you're seeing that in other markets that don't have price controls. You're seeing it in the Sun Belt. You're seeing it in Texas. You're seeing it all over the country now. Rents are coming down. Why are rents coming down? Because we've built so much more new supply this year. And in markets without price controls, the market is deciding where the rents are going. If you introduce more supply into a market where demand is flat or goes down, housing prices will go down. George, this is what New York City needs to do. They need to introduce more supply, and that's only going to happen if they get their policy correct. New York City housing problems are absolutely a policy issue, and they got to solve that right now.
We'll keep an eye on it. It'll be interesting to see. We talk all the time about ROI, but I was recently, my attention was brought to this concept of return on hassle.
Return on hassle, like time, like headache and time.
Yeah, exactly. Essentially, the idea you need to consider the time and work associated with an investment.
I love how there's a buzz phrase now for something that anybody who has any experience, practices.
Yeah, no, totally.
ROH, return on hassle. Like,
exactly.
Someone like me who's 55 and I've been in business for 34 years, it's like, that's a pain in the ass. I'm not doing that. And then now that's spun into ROH.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, like, what's your pain in the ass rule? Like, how have you handled that in the past? How have you calculated that when you're deciding an investment?
When you're younger, you have a really high tolerance for headaches, problems, pain in the ass stuff, right? Like, you're not thinking straight like an older, more experienced person. You just want to get in there. You want the deal. You want the opportunity. You want to get into business. You'll figure everything else out later. You just got to get this deal done, right? So you'll take a big headache factor. When you get older, you're like, I don't know. I don't want the headache. George, I can tolerate a big headache factor right now, but it's not like it was when I was starting in my 20s.
I was going to say, you also know what kind of headaches you might experience more than you did in your 20s, I would imagine.
I've been chased up and down West 135th Street by a guy holding a machete. I've been shot at. I've been beaten up and jumped and assaulted. I've been all that stuff. I just wouldn't get into those situations today. I mean, it wouldn't be me going to the building, getting into the situations. But when I was younger, I had to go knock on doors and collect rents. I had to go, manage the property. I had to go be the person on site, Now and I wouldn't even condone a younger person stepping into an unsafe situation like I just described. But I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't buy that building. I wouldn't do that deal. If there was any of that stuff, that headache stuff, I wouldn't do it now. My time is the most valuable thing I have, right? Investing is about time and money, and I have a finite amount of money I have to put to work, and I have a finite amount of time in which to make the whole thing happen. And it's got to be enjoyable for me in a lot of different ways, at least minimally. So I have a low tolerance for headaches and hassle right now.
Is that a formal part of your kind of investment process, or is that more of an intuitive gut check thing?
It's not that formal. How do you quantify? Yeah. Like, you look at a deal, you're like, oh, the roof's falling in. We're going to have to, all right, so we'll replace a roof. I mean, that's not really a hassle for me. A little bit of landlord-tenant legal matters, not such a hassle for me. A little bit of hair. We call it hair. There's hair on the deal. A little bit of hair, it's fine. A lot of hair can be fine. The amount of hair that I can deal with is directly proportionate to my skill set and experience. So right now I can handle a lot of hair. I just, a lot of times choose not to because it's a pain in the ass. And I want to get paid for it if I do. And in today's market and the market of recent years, you don't get paid for handling the hair. It used to be you could buy a building without hair or a building with hair. And if you bought the building with hair, you got an appropriate discount so that by the time you cured all the hair, you were better off having bought that one versus the clean one. That hasn't been the case with recent markets. Recent markets were offering us crappy opportunities that had a lot of hair, and we had to buy them, and they were hairy. And, there was no discount. It was like, you want the asset, this is it. You're like, yeah, but it doesn't comp the same way as a clean deal. Well, if you want it, buy it. That's the market we've been in for the past 10 years.
Netflix recently got attention for offering $900,000 a year for an AI development position.
I read that. I wish I could develop AI.
That's I was curious because they made a whole thing on the media and people on emails and things. What do you think a move like that signals for the market in general with regards to AI and proper compensation?
I remember at some point earlier this year, maybe, or the end of last year, we talked a lot about AI, and we said that AI will kill lots of industries and jobs, but it will also have lots of new doors opening because now we will now go work for the companies that are doing the AI. And this is what you've just suggested, one example. And it's a $900,000 a year salaried position. We've heard for a long time, coding, engineering, computer science, right? To what end? A $900,000 a year salary. Pretty good. So, if I were a young person today, I would look into that. I would look into what the needs of the future of this industry are, and I would educate myself on those skills. So I don't know what the 900 grand AI employee needs to do, if they need to be a coder, if they're like, I don't know. But I'd research that and I'd find it out and I'd go acquire those skills. And maybe I don't get 900, but maybe I get 500. Not so bad, You know what you are if you're a $500,000 employee? You're in the 1%.
Yeah, it strikes me as not quite as much of a pipe dream as maybe playing in the NBA, but similar in that the income disparity between the top players and the bottom players could be very large, but you're still within a big range, I think. So like, for instance, this $900,000 employee, I would imagine you have to know Python. ChatGPT is built on Python as a programming language. So that's a super basic skill. But in order to do that level of it, you must have to be, the Kobe Bryant of Python or whatever.
And let the free market play out that way. Let the $900,000 employee be the best in that class. Because if I'm the employer paying the 900, I want the best. I don't want like some average person. I want the best person for that skill set. Let it play out. That's the way it is in every other industry.
Yeah. Yeah, and it still seems that if you have a basic knowledge of, machine learning in addition to some kind of coding proficiency, you'd still be able to get in the $100,000 range, which is still pretty crazy.
All of which you don't need
a
college degree for.
Yeah.
I mean, you could acquire Python skills online. Like there's all sorts of ways to take that path without going to college.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I have to say that.
Yeah, don't have to pay a $4,000 consultant to learn Python.
Right. Well, maybe to learn Python so that you then get the $900,000 job.
Yeah.
Go pay the $4,000 to the consultant all day long for that, but don't pay the $4,000 to be accepted into a socially fucked up subset of your local community. Like it's
well, then again, you're running the ROI. Is the return on investment actually going to pan out for you? And in a sorority, it's far from guaranteed.
When you talk about the sorority consultant thing, I think of the Reese Witherspoon,
Legally Blonde.
Yeah, everyone's very conforming to the same set of ideals and physically look similar, and they speak the same. They have that voice, that affected voice, and it's all I don't know. I hope and pray for something different for our future and for our young people.
Yeah, we're all just trying to be individuals in a world of conformity. Yeah. So Yellow trucking business went bankrupt recently.
Yes, they did.
They blamed the Teamsters largely, but then there's also market regulations that are going on there,
and a lot of debt. They had a lot of debt,
right? Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, just in general, any observations about that experience? We're seeing a lot of things, not just with the trucking industry, but all industries, this tension between corporate and union interests, and a lot of rhetoric around that.
Unions have changed, and my opinions about them have changed over the years. It used to be, I remember, unions were created for positive purpose. They had a positive effect, and it created maybe a better product, maybe created some general work practices and guidelines where the employer and employee relationship could then be governed by those guidelines. And it wasn't as tumultuous as it is now. So fast forward to now, these unions are very big political arms, very, very influential. It's out of whack to me. To me, it's the tail wagging the dog. Look, I think teachers need to make a lot of money. I think we need to hire the best and the brightest, like in any private industry. I want the best teachers in our schools teaching kids, and they should make a lot of money. And the crappy teachers shouldn't get hired. And we should create a meritocracy in the educational system where we get the best and the brightest, because that's what private industry does. Private industry wants the best and the brightest. That's what Google wants when they go out and offer $900,000 for their AI Python guy. Well, I want my schools to want the best teachers that there are. Not every teacher is great. Some are. Some aren't, like with anything. But what you find is you get into these situations, the unions become involved. You're in the teachers union. You could be a subpar teacher, non-performing teacher, be a horrible teacher. But if you're in a union, whether it's teachers or any other type of union. They sort of protect the poor performers. That part I don't like about it. Get rid of the subpar and non-performing members. If they don't perform, they can still be a teacher or a carpenter, but just not in your union. Like they can go be a non-union carpenter or teacher, or whatever the case is.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting that, I mean, it's funny, Labor Day, literally just passed. And when you view when unions really came into the picture for the U.S. in the early 1900s, it was really intense working conditions that, they were fighting against and protecting workers from. And so it's easy to look back on that and view unions as a completely virtuous, entity. And today I feel like we have a slightly skewed image of that tension between unions and corporations, where if you're pro-corporation, you say, oh, well, they're job creators, and so unions are just, trying to get rid of that, and it's problematic. And then if they're pro-union media, they'll say, oh, well, they're just trying to protect the worker, and it's all great. And instead of, I think it's probably more true that these are both two powerful entities that are functioning within the market, and it just so happens that the labor unions, their resource for negotiation and power is labor, and that it's, it's a power thing.
Didn't the labor union say, let yellow fail? Go ahead. Why is that a good thing? Why should a labor union who needs the employer to employ its members, why is it a good thing if they adopt the attitude, screw them, let them fail. We'll show them. Why is that good business?
I'm not part of the union, so I don't know, but I would imagine the argument is that, well, if we send out this warning shot and now the other corporations see that we mean business, that then we have more negotiating power, and then, we have better conditions. I think the argument is that we have better conditions for our workers because now we have negotiating power. But I think the danger there is that if you have a world that's only run by unions and corporations, and there's no ability to be a small business in that world, that's, it's scary. The man who does more than he is paid for will soon be paid for more than he does.
I love it. Love everything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. What resonates about that? You told me about that a while ago.
Everything resonates with me about that. Yeah. I just had a recent conversation with my young nephew who's graduating college. He's now fielding job offers. And he says to me, Uncle Pete, what do I do? Do I move to Washington, D.C., where the pay is a little bit more with this one company, and I've got a lot of friends there and I know people? Or do I stick it out in Charlotte with a really good job offer? It's not as much money as the DC job offer. Should I chase the money? I'm like, what's the better opportunity? The better opportunity is the one, in this case, that pays slightly less, and you don't know anybody in Charlotte. Like, he's going to have to be in Charlotte. He's not going to know he's going to start over socially, right? That's what he was solving for by considering the DC job offer. And because he knows people there. And the better opportunity is in Charlotte. And I advised him to stick it out. The better opportunities in Charlotte. If you do your job right, you're not going to have time for a social life. You're 21 years old. I don't care what your social life. You'll meet people, but you should be showing up early, staying late, and working hard. And only be focused on that. Don't be focused on happy hour. Don't be focused on hump day. Don't be focused on what am I going to do this weekend and who am I going to do it with. That will all come. Be focused on making such an impression on this company that gave you this job that they're going to be beside themselves and not going to know what to do with you because you're just knocking it out of the park at every possible moment. That comes with hard work, focus, dedication, long days, long hours. Yes, yes, yes. Hey, can you be here at 8 a.m. on a Saturday? Yes. Hey, sorry to trouble you. Can you work late on Sunday? Yes. When you're 21, sorry, I don't care about your work-life balance because everyone else is caring about work-life balance. When you're 21, grind your knuckles to the bone and work your ass off, and your job is to impress people so much. They're like, wow, guy comes early, they stay late. She says yes to everything. She never lets me down. She's reliable. That's what you want. This is your opportunity to define yourself as those things.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. Appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.
Great to be with you, George. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.